What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Montreal Canadiens. It's been a rough season for the Habs to start off with. Maybe the expectation that they could get back into the playoffs and maybe putting themselves in kind of the same tier or vein as teams like the Ottawa Senators, the Detroit Red Wings, the Buffalo Sabres, all vying for a playoff spot there in the Atlantic Division. And at this point, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case for the Habs. We're going to discuss the Habs, what they've done so far, what we can expect the rest of the season, and potentially if there's going to be any moves for the Habs. We're going to discuss all of that today. So I want to start off with, kind of how I started with the topic of today's video, because I was thinking around the league, I'm like, what team should I talk about today? And I think the Habs are an interesting team right now for a multitude of reasons. And the fact that it's not that they're losing games. Obviously, that is frustrating. They're 5-10-2 through their first 17 games of the season. That's pretty far from what I think a lot of Habs fans and most of the league were expecting. Like, maybe we didn't expect them to be great this season, but we didn't expect them to be that bad and that bad out of the gate. And when you look at some of these losses, it's kind of startling the way that they're losing some of these games. And just to go through some of their bigger losses so far this season. Their first loss of the season, a 6-4 loss to the Boston Bruins. Then a couple days later, they played Pittsburgh, lost that game 6-3. Then they went on to lose, and this was on now the beginning of a 6-game losing streak through the first 9 games of the season, mind you. A 7-2 loss to the Rangers, 4-1 loss to the Kings, okay? And then we have a couple bad ones here in the month, at the end of October into early November. 8-2 loss to Seattle, 6-3 loss to Washington, 5-3 loss to New Jersey, 4-1 loss to the Leafs, and then most recently, their most recent loss, a 3-0 loss to the Minnesota Wild. Now, obviously, there's a couple in there that really stand out negatively, and the fact they have the 7-2 loss to the Rangers, an 8-2 loss to Seattle, 6-3 loss to the Caps. Now, those are pretty good teams, but what's the theme there? They're giving up 6, 7, even 8 goals in a game. And that's not good, right? Not many teams are going to be able to outscore 6, 7, 8 goals given up against in a game. And yeah, you know what? We knew that the Habs defense was young. And they're going to have their hiccups. They have a lot of younger guys in that blue line, and it makes sense. It's not the most surprising, but I think what's frustrating is it's the theme of we have been losing for a couple of years now. And a lot of people have been making videos. I know the hockey guy recently made a video. That was a really good video. You should definitely check that out, about the endless rebuilds around the National Hockey League. And Elliot Friedman had mentioned it in a podcast as well. That's a topic right now of discussion, because you look at some of these teams that have kind of started their rebuilds over the last 6, 7, 8 years. It is really difficult to get out of a rebuild. And for Montreal, they haven't even been in a rebuild that long. I mean, let's remember, in 2022, they went to the Stanley Cup final. Coming this spring, it's going to be 3 years since then. It hasn't even been that long. So when you look at this lineup, there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot of things that are obviously of concern. But to be honest, this is just, to be honest with you, just a very young team that's still learning the ropes. And when you look at guys like Caden Gooley and Lane Hudson, and even Arbor Jack guy, Jaden Struble, those guys are still very young on this lineup. And that's 4 of your 6 defensemen all being fairly young, and maybe not rookies necessarily, but they're definitely younger than a guy that would be, say, on a Stanley Cup contending or a championship team that has a lot more veterans, right? And that's with David Reinbacher out of the lineup as well. And that obviously doesn't help matters for this team. Now, I will say up front, it also doesn't help that they don't have Patrick Laine. He was a big acquisition for this team in the offseason. He's no longer there. So obviously, yeah, that's not going to make the situation easier for the Habs, but they still have enough here where you're looking at the roster and you're saying there's enough there. They could probably put together a decent season. It just hasn't worked out that way for the Habs. And on paper, they may look pretty good up front, but I talked about this in my preseason predictions for the Habs, and that's a very young, not really reliable defense, and that's kind of what we're seeing here. And I hate to pat myself on the back and say I told you so, but that's kind of what we have here with the Habs this season. You know, I think overall this team's gonna be okay, but people don't want to hear that. People want to hear like this team is trending in the right direction and they're going to be potentially, at least in December, we'll still be talking about the Habs. Well, they could maybe make the playoffs. At this rate, I think, and this is kind of leading into the next topic of what do the Habs do next here. The reality is, like, even if they make a pretty big move here and they get a big acquisition, so instead of being like maybe 28th in the league, maybe they'll be 20th. And you're probably still looking at pretty far from a playoff spot, even if you make one big acquisition. I think that's the problem here for the Habs, is they aren't one piece away. This isn't a situation where, you know, and I think a lot of the, you know, heat has gone on Marty St. Louis as well, which isn't probably fair. Those guys believe in St. Louis. I think it's just this team's really realizing, like, people are going to start taking you a little more seriously. And I think for the Habs, right now, they were taken seriously to start the season. They're a legit team on paper, but now they're dealing with the grind of, like, this is a situation where teams are not going to just, and now maybe the rest of the way, because of their record, maybe teams see them as an easier game, and maybe that changes a little bit. But overall, this team has a lot of flaws with it. And like I said, the defense kind of being the premier thing here. I mean, you know, Samuel Montembeault has been their starter. He's giving up 3.5 goals per game. Caden Primo is giving up over 4.5 goals per game. 845 save percentage for Primo. 893 save percentage for Montembeault. And you can't put all the pressure on the goaltending, and considering that isn't a real great goaltending tandem to begin with, and then on top of that, the young growing pains of a young hockey team, it's a lot to ask for the Habs. This is not a roster that you really expected to be anything more than a maybe playoff team down the stretch. That's all you could hope for, and I just think, unfortunately, this is the bottom for where the Habs are going to be this season, and things just haven't worked out for them. And, you know, there is a lot of positives, I will say. I mean, you know, Cole Caulfield has 12 goals on the season. Gallagher playing third-line minutes. Yeah, he gets power play time too, but he's got 7 goals this season. Suzuki's got 17 points this season, despite how horrible things have gone for the Habs. Those guys are still pulling their weight. And that's something that you can look at as some kind of positivity here, right? Because, yeah, looking at the roster right now and the record, obviously, like, it's hard to be positive. But there's reason for optimism for this team. I know people don't want to hear that, because up in Montreal especially, expectations are high. We haven't made the playoffs in 2 years. And, you know, last time we went to the Cup final, but that doesn't matter. We didn't win, right? So it's very easy to forget when you don't win the Stanley Cup just what it takes to get there. And for the Habs, you know, they're pretty much dead last in the league. They're 31st in the league for goals against. Like I said, they're giving up a lot of goals, and their goals for isn't making up for it. That's 25th in the league. So they're not scoring enough, and they're giving up too many goals. And that's kind of an easy recipe for why they're struggling. And in those games, too, that they do lose, it's pretty dramatic, right? Like I said, the 7-2, 8-2 losses, like those this early in the season before we hit game 20, like that is definitely of concern for the Habs, and I think we all pretty much know that. You know, like I said, the guys you want to see doing well are, but it's definitely tough, and you got to think for guys like Brendan Gallagher, you know, a little bit older, Matheson, like you got to feel for those guys a little bit. Josh Anderson, because the reality is, unless those guys get traded, like they're kind of stuck here for the rest of their careers, and I hate to say that like that, but you know, they probably would have liked to chase another cup before they retire, or a cup for some of them. And it just doesn't seem like that's going to happen with the Habs. And Suzuki, the clock's ticking on him too. I mean, not that he's going to leave or anything, but he's turning 26 this year, I think. And he's probably thinking to himself, you know, we went to the cup final in 22. Will I ever go back with just how this rebuild is, and the fact that, like I said earlier in the video, we're not one piece away. How much longer am I going to have to endure this? So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. What do you guys think of the Habs? Realistically, can the Habs maybe get back to the playoffs next year? Because I think it's possible, but I definitely hesitate when I say that because the East is full of so many, and I hate to say this, mid teams right now, and it kind of looks like every team other than maybe the Rangers and the Hurricanes in the East, it's kind of up for grabs in the East. You know, between Tampa, Boston, Toronto, even in their own division there, Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, like every team is kind of a toss-up at this point, and there's definitely been a little bit of a gap established between the haves and the have-nots this season, but there's definitely still room for error for a lot of those teams when you have teams like the Habs that are just at the bottom, and it's going to take a lot for the Habs to make up ground from where they've already come. I expect things to turn around a little bit more positively for them because things have just been that bad. But this is where that leadership is really going to have to play a factor here for the Habs. The veterans and the leadership in this room is going to have to find a way to turn this around and get some kind of positive momentum. And even if it doesn't mean they make the playoffs, it's more so just to preserve maybe some of the younger players on the team. If nothing else, preserve them from sort of that mentality of what we saw in Edmonton in the mid-2010s, right? Like, you want to have rebuilds where you don't have just a bunch of young guys kind of taking over things, because fortunately that can be a disaster, like we learned with the Oilers. And there are a couple of veterans on this Habs team, but it's going to have to come from guys like Suzuki and Caulfield because there isn't that many. There are a lot of younger players in this roster. So let me know what you guys think down below. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys are interested, I have links down below for our newest Goal Line Hockey merch. We've got some Christmas merchandise. We've got some Goal Line Hockey green and red merchandise. I made my order already, so if you're interested in any of that, make sure to check those links down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.